Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a lovely Saturday. I can see you're bathed in sun there, so it must be very comfortable. Welcome to Reshaping Education in Complex Times. So, education. It's kind of been the same for the last 300 or so years, okay? Now we have digital whiteboards, and maybe we have tablets as well, but education essentially is teacher stands at the front of the class, gets some knowledge, crams it into a student's head. That student then vomits it onto their exam paper to immediately forget it 5 minutes later. Is this the best way to educate our future generations? I didn't think so. It absolutely isn't. So we're here today to look at some of the alternative ways to change education, to fix education, and to reshape education. So for our keynote, I'd like to welcome to the stage Sobhi Tawil, the Director of Future Learning at UNESCO. So please put your hands together for Sobhi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Back to the future, reshaping education in complex times. Complexity is largely driven by technological innovation, so reshaping education is in great part about our visions of technological innovation and the future. And to better understand these visions, both the hopes and the fears that they convey, it is useful to look back. So what better place to go back to the future than where we are right now, this magnificent Grand Palais, one of the landmarks of Paris. Built specifically for the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1900, exactly 125 years ago. The Paris Exposition of 1900 attracted over 50 million visitors. And the theme was Le bilan d'un siècle, taking stock of a century, looking back to see ahead. And the focus was on technological innovation and how this would shape the future. Visitors traveled by moving sidewalks, les trottoirs roulants, sur Rue de l'Avenir, on future streets. The Gare de Lyon train station was built specifically at that time to manage the massive influx of visitors coming to Paris on this occasion. It was the time of the first metro line in Paris, Ligne 1. And here's the monumental entrance to the Paris Exposition at the time, at Porte Binet. And Porte Binet was illustrated on cards like this one, cards that visitors could collect and keep as souvenirs. But most interesting, I think, for us, was a series of cards that were commissioned to celebrate the Paris Exposition of 1900. And the series was called En l'an 2000, in the year 2000. So they were projecting and imagining the future 100 years ahead in the year 2000. And this series of cards were largely intended to be used as collectible cards. They really depicted technological innovation imagined 100 years into the future, an optimistic portrayal of technological advances that would make life easier and more efficient. And the series of cards remained obscure for a long time, for decades. But they resurfaced when science fiction writer and futurist Isaac Asimov published a selection of these cards in his book published in 1986, The Future Days, a 19th century vision of the year 2000. Here is one of the cards illustrating the way in which technology would make domestic work easier. So welcome to the vacuum cleaner, the ancestor of the vacuum cleaner. The post. No, we would not even have to go to the front door to receive the postman because you have the flying postman coming to deliver. But no one could have imagined in 1900 that today, 100 years later, actually today, 125 years later, anyone, everyone can instantaneously send electronic mail and receive anywhere at any time. Perhaps here, the vision of the architects and the automation of work, the full automation in this image of construction work. And today, fears of automation and the projected mass displacement of labor caused by generative AI is of an entirely different scale. And some of you are familiar with the 2023 Goldman Sachs report and projection that estimate that 2/3 of all jobs will be affected in some way by AI. So looking back can help us imagine the future. And Confucius said, study the past if you wish to define the future. And we've been doing this. We've been doing this for a long time, with special attention to how the future has been imagined and projected in the past. And this book by Glenn Adamson, which was published just last December, does exactly that. A Century of Tomorrows, how imagining the future shapes the present. So what about education? What image for the future of education? Actually, we've always tried to imagine the future of education at different times in our recent history. And we can catch glimpses of these visions in some of the popular culture and entertainment. This image, for example, is from the Jetsons cartoon in the 1960s, the robot teacher. And more than half a century later, 60 years later, the promise and the fear of how technology may replace teachers is still with us. Here is a drawing by Atari, the video game console, which was popular in the 1980s. And we see a third-grade class studying space travel. On the left, you see a group of students studying design of a spacecraft, while the group on the right are running a simulation of a Mars landing. Perhaps Elon Musk was in the room at the time. Moving to the 2000s, more recently, we began to see projections of how the future of education might be guided primarily by neurotechnology, literally uploading knowledge and skills to our mind and to our body. And who can forget this image from the movie Matrix in 1999, when Keanu Reeves was hooked to a machine and taught various martial arts like jiu-jitsu. Here is a vision of learning in 2050 as illustrated by an artist in 2016. A robot teacher assisting and guiding students through the lessons. And they're learning directly using virtual reality headsets, taking a trip inside the human body, and in this case, discovering anatomy, biology in pretty amazing ways. And so there are endless possibilities for the use. And the use of robots as teachers does not necessarily mean the replacement or displacement of human teachers. Handing part of the teaching process to machines can actually give teachers more time to prepare and create content, to monitor students' performance, and to adapt lessons to individual learning needs. And this resonates very much with what we hear today about AI tutors and personalized learning. 2020 came COVID, an illustration produced for the Wall Street Journal during the COVID-19 school closures. It depicts COVID-19 models of remote distance learning that have clearly helped to shape our visions of the future of education. And while the school closures during COVID normalized digital and hybrid learning, the experience of remote digital learning also raised concerns and issues around learning in isolation and learning in the absence of human interaction. And very recently, many are projecting what learning and education might entail in the new age of supercomputing and the anticipated advent of quantum computers. But now back to the future and to our series of cards produced at the time of the Exposition Universelle here in Paris and at the Grand Palais. Intriguing images. Here was the image of the classroom of the future, projected 100 years at the time. We may laugh, but I think useful that we unpack just a few of the elements that we see here. First, technology. The learning machine here is imagined as part of the school equipment and the school infrastructure, much like the idea of computer labs that we have had, that ensure that all students, in this particular case all boys, that all students have access to computers, possibly to the internet, and to the learning opportunities that that offers. But since the emergence of the internet, and more recently the smartphone, we have the promise of ubiquitous learning, learning anytime, learning anywhere. And here a young girl on their smartphone, on her smartphone, communicating, socializing, having fun, possibly learning. Today, the scale and use and ownership of smartphones is something we could have not even imagined a generation ago. In the European Union, it's the case for France, the use and the estimation is at least 95% of young people between the ages of 16 and 21 own a smartphone. And the ownership of smartphones is growing among younger and younger children. In Spain, approximately 70% of children aged 10 to 15, 70% own a smartphone. In the UK, over half of the children aged 8 to 11 own a smartphone. And with this comes the growing educational concern around the world, and we have seen the increasing number of countries that have been tried to ban or manage the use of smartphones in school. Next, on the knowledge. What about the knowledge? Here we see the teacher crunching textbooks into knowledge in the grinder, tossing in the textbooks. The vision of knowledge here is static, predefined, packaged for educational purposes through prescribed curricula and textbooks. The teacher doesn't engage with the learners. The teacher doesn't even engage with knowledge. At most, the teacher is simply selecting textbooks and tossing them into the machine. But today, machine learning models process data, recognize patterns, transform them into meaningful knowledge. These models mimic human cognition and remind us that knowledge is not static, and it is the result of continuous refinement, interpretation, a process of adaptive learning. Education is really about learning to think, learning to connect ideas, and how to approach problems and propose solutions. Let's look at the teaching and learning approaches in this image of the future from the past. The students sitting in the classroom are connected to the machine, the knowledge machine, and not to the teacher. not to each other. It's a one-way transfer of information and knowledge that some would call the banking model. There's no interaction with the teacher, with each other, with technology, with knowledge. Unlike what we could see here or in so many other contexts where we see communication, peer learning, learning by doing, experiential learning, construction of knowledge or co-construction of knowledge. A word on the space of learning. Here we see an image where there's no movement, immobile, passive bodies, almost imprisoned, receiving knowledge directly into their brains. Here, in contrast, is an image of an innovative school, innovative design of a school in New York. Actually, the school discontinued, but that's another story. But far from the design of traditional learning environments or learning classroom environments. And the designers wished really to reinforce the idea that indoor learning spaces, and they're not the only ones, would allow children to engage in interactive, inclusive, collaborative learning where mind and body could both find expression. And now back to our 1990 classroom of the future. We have to ask, who is this boy and what is he doing? He's actually the assistant who is helping to operate the miraculous learning machine. He's the only one in the class that's doing any physical labor, helping to realize the promises of technology in terms of learning while being excluded from the benefits. The learners are learning, but here's this one student who is not benefiting from this. And this can bring to mind images of invisible digital workers who fuel the automated economy. Here a photo of exploited AI workers in digital sweatshops, feeding data into AI models, part of an underclass of what some have referred to as ghost workers. The last point to say that most discussions about the future of education is about what we need to learn, 21st century skills, how to define them, classify them, how we learn, how pedagogy should change. All important questions, but the basic question that we often overlook is the why of learning. And at UNESCO, with our Reimagining Our Futures Together initiative, initiated just a couple of years ago, this was precisely the intention. Reimagining our futures together, to think, imagine, and act together to reshape education, an education that can rebalance our relationships to each other, to the planet, and to technology. And this is really the question that is open to all the innovators and change makers at this ChangeNOW Congress, and what we will hear from the panelists, some of the most inspirational experiences in reshaping education for the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic.